My name is Claire Wardle. I'm the US Director of First Draft, and I am based in the States. And as you can imagine, everything I'm thinking about at the moment is related to this election, which is just days away. So I thought in this presentation, I would talk about a number of different things. I'm going to start off by talking about tactics and techniques that we're seeing in terms of dis and misinformation circulating related to the election. I'm then going to have a little bit of a moment of what would you do? We do scenarios as part of our training in First Draft, and I thought we'd do a little bit of that to help you think through the challenges that we're all facing right now, platforms, newsrooms, civil society, and just people who are concerned about disinformation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how could we have been better prepared. It will not surprise anybody to hear that the fact that we're this close to the election means I'm tearing my hair out at how badly prepared we are, considering we've had convenings since 2017, almost on a weekly basis, trying to figure out what to do. And the fact that we're 3 weeks out and we're where we are, I think is unforgivable. So I'll have a little bit of a moan, and then I'm going to end by saying, well, what is it that we need to do now? So tactics and techniques. This is just from, I think, 1 week in Pennsylvania. I mean, the scale of this stuff is astonishing. It is impossible to keep up with. It's everywhere. It takes so many different formats. The scale of the problem is something that even I did not see coming, even though I've been thinking about these issues for a while. It really is eye-watering every single day. So I'm just going to talk about a number of things. Again, some of these things, some of you may have heard me bang on about, but they're still a problem. The number one, visuals, memes, and screenshots are still compelling vehicles of disinformation, and we do not have the tools that make it possible to really effectively monitor these spaces, particularly TikTok and YouTube. It's very difficult for us, even Instagram, to find this content, make sense of this content, and it is everywhere. And I still don't think we take this kind of content seriously enough in the space that all of us move in. Screenshots, they are not sexy. They're still one of the most damaging examples of this. So here's an AOC tweet. Nobody really seems to understand how easy it is to create these screenshots. And George Buck, who was running in Florida's congressional 13th district, shared it, not realizing it was a screenshot. How are we here where this is still a problem that we're battling with? Secondly, closed groups and messaging apps are increasingly influential. Everybody knows this, but the pivot to privacy about 18 months ago has meant that a lot of this content is locked up in spaces that makes it very difficult to monitor. And even when we can monitor, there are real ethical challenges in doing so. And in the battleground states, there are very large groups. They're kind of excessive quarantine groups that we've seen bubbling and grow since about March or April. And you're seeing anti-vaxxers, QAnon, Second Amendment rights people, all together in these anti-mask, excessive quarantine groups, and they are big and they are angry, and there is a ton of stuff every single day in these groups. Again, you know this too, but it's genuine content used strategically and in a misleading way. It's very rarely outright fabricated content. So here's an example. That is a genuine image of peanut butter, but I'm joking, and I shouldn't do this kind of stuff. We're seeing a ton of people saying, oh my God, look at these ballots that I've been sent. And they're actually applications of ballots. This person is complaining that they've got 2 ballots, one of them for a person who doesn't live there anymore, when it was an application. The concerns this year around the electoral process, because in many states it has changed, means that, as we know, vacuums or confusion is when misinformation flourishes. And so it's a perfect storm right now for people being confused online and other people taking that confusion as deliberate attempts to undermine the election or for it to be fraud and other things. And so it's a real mess, and it has been for months now. And again, you all know this, but this is a genuine image. It was posted in a Michigan conservative network group, but it's actually a genuine image from 2016, and it's Delaware. But if you want to believe that the mail service is left-wing and is anti-Trump, then this works in 2020 even more than it did in 2016, because it fits an existing narrative that's online. And here's the left going crazy. This was, you can see the engagement numbers here, but this circulated in August. Picture of what looked like lots of mailboxes that had been taken off the street, and it completely fit the narrative, which is the Postal Service is not prepared for this election. Well, we did a little bit of digging at First Draft, and we found that this was actually the center that refurbishes mailboxes. Turns out mailboxes often need to be repainted, and it needs to have some WD-40, make sure that it doesn't get squeaky. But nobody wants wants to hear those details, those boxes were planned to be taken off the streets and they were being replaced. Again, doesn't fit the narrative, and so nobody wants to stop and think about it. Some of this stuff is darker. This is a sponsored ad on Facebook, but actually we tracked it back, and it was actually a kind of a data mining service in DC. We do have to have bigger conversations about the way that PR organizations are being utilized to push this kind of content, and the way that ads are being used for data mining. It's a much bigger conversation, but I want to really stress this idea that a lot of the content, or sorry, a lot of the tactics that we saw in 2016, or we really understood by 2017, the playbook was kind of discussed. And now we see a number of different individuals and organizations, including campaigns themselves, using these kind of techniques in really worrying ways. Great work by the Tau Center around these pink slime local news sites. Many of us know that very serious problems about local news deserts in many, many countries, particularly in the US. And we also know that lots of local news sites are actually pretty slow to load, have loads of ads on them, often behind paywalls. Well, what do? You take the trust for local news and you create really shiny local news sites that load really quickly. And on Facebook, they look like they're absolutely authentic. And unfortunately, we're seeing both the right and the left, campaigns on both the left and the right, using these tactics to create what looks like professional news content, but using them to push out pro stories about their candidates and oppositional stories against the oppositional candidates. Again, lots of tactics and techniques here that are just pretty basic, but seem to be really working effectively. Sock puppets accounts. I think we all know this, that we're seeing fewer bots and sock puppets now than we did in 2016 because the platforms have worked harder to crack down on them. But we're still seeing this. This was an anti-Chinese network that was pretty easy to investigate. But the bigger question here is, what happens when it's not bots, but we have humans acting in that way? So about a month ago, we heard about Turning Point USA, a conservative group that were paying young people to push out pro-Trump content. Like, is that coordinated inauthentic behavior? Well, yes, because they're paid. But what about other people who are essentially really, really passionate about a topic or a candidate and are essentially just publishing 200 times a day? We need to think about those forms of amplification and what we're okay with and what we're not. Imposter content, again, we know this. People's brains are overloaded. They're desperately looking for these heuristics. Looking at a name that you recognize or a news logo that you recognize goes a long way. So here's poor Byron Donalds, who had an SMS campaign against him, basically saying he was dropping out of the race and using a Fox 4 image of his family to use that as evidence. And poor Byron has like, no, absolutely false. I'm not dropping out of the race. But this was circulating on SMS, very difficult to monitor and to stop because of the spaces that it was traveling. And we all know this, but we have failed previously to take seriously the ways in which certain communities have been disproportionately targeted. And many representatives from those communities have been shouting since 2014, saying, why is nobody listening to us? There is more of a recognition in 2020 that this is happening. We have 3 members of my team who are only looking at disinformation targeting Black and Latinx voters. But still, many newsrooms do not have Spanish language speakers on staff. Many newsrooms are not trusted by those communities. There are real problems here around how do we ensure that this kind of content is being watched and these kind of communities are being supported. And lastly, I'm going to end with the problem of keyword squatting, which if I can recommend anything, I would recommend reading Joan Donovan and Brian Friedberg's piece on source hacking, where they talk about keyword squatting, which is coordinating to associate a word, hashtag or search term with an agenda or worldview. And so about 6 weeks ago, there were over 200 rallies planned in the US around saving the children. And for many people, they were like, oh my goodness, I want to save the child. I mean, nobody is against that. But what it turned out was that actually the organizers of these rallies were QAnon people, and they regularly post conspiratorial content. But they had recognized that QAnon's PR not been great recently, and they needed a way to recruit. And so they very cleverly hooked onto this idea that there are a number of different organizations working against human trafficking, particularly for sex trafficking reasons, and recognized that this was a moment for them to kind of recruit. And so those of us who are looking in places like 4chan, or even on the right-hand side here, you can see a post that's got very benign hashtags, Hollywood, Los Angeles, end human trafficking. And it's only at the end, which hashtag WWG1WGA, where we go one, we go all, which is the QAnon slogan, that you might have picked this up. But all of this stuff was happening in the back end, but many, many local newsrooms had no understanding of what was happening here. And so amplified and gave oxygen to what was happening. And so many, many local newsrooms reported on these rallies just straight down the line, not understanding how it was connected to QAnon, not understanding how the hashtag and these nonprofits had been basically manipulated and used by QAnon to push their narrative. So this is hard, but it's what we have been talking about, this idea of the trumpet of amplification, which is based on trading up the chain, this idea that information moves through the ecosystem. And I still don't think we've got enough of a handle on that. When we talk about trust and truth online, we too frequently focus on the end of that, the social media part, and we ignore, or because it's difficult, we don't understand how this stuff is moving and is being, not just moving, how it's being created at the other end of that spectrum. The piece that's missing from this trumpet that was designed in 2018 is, altogether now, politicians, and who have in the last 2 years become a much bigger problem when it comes to this trumpet of amplification, because from a news media perspective, they can say, we're not going to report on a bot network. It's much harder to say, we're not going to report on either a celebrity or a politician who is pushing conspiratorial content, which, as we know, we've seen much more of. And I'm not calling out this newsroom here, but this is one example that we see too often, which is the amplification of essentially lies or disinformation coming from the president and not knowing how to frame that. So here, simply amplifying that and saying, is this a good idea? This tweet was not a good idea. And I'm not blaming anybody for this, but the fine line between reporting on a president and essentially amplifying lies is the biggest challenge we have. And it's very difficult for many of us to talk about this. But at the moment, the biggest disinformation campaign is coming from the administration. And that's exceptionally worrying. And it makes it very difficult for us to think about solutions if we don't tackle that truth head on. This was the example that the New York Times gave. And again, we know the New York Times isn't always perfect, but here's a headline that I love. Down in the polls, Trump floats delaying election, which he cannot do. But these are very new skills that newsrooms need. How do you report on lies in this way? And we just actually worked with the Internet Archive, and one of the researchers published the research this morning, but we looked at every time that Trump's tweets and Biden's had appeared on news media, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And we actually found 40 tweets out of over 1,000 tweets where Trump was essentially pushing a narrative that the vote was going to be fraudulent or rigged, or you couldn't trust mail-in ballots. Of those 40, only 5 have been labeled by Twitter. But what does it mean when you've had 40 tweets, a drip, 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 drip of this narrative basically being pushed by the news media and given that oxygen? And if you haven't read this great piece of research by Berkman Klein Center, led by Yochai Benkler, a couple of weeks ago, it's really worth doing so. Mail-in voter fraud, Anatomy of a Disinformation Campaign, where they talk about that this narrative has been driven by an elite-driven mass media model and that social media plays a secondary role in 2020. So we have to understand the interplay between content online and how it's being discussed, debunked or not by the mainstream media. And again, another great piece of reporting this week by Brandy Zadrozny from NBC, talking about how many people very close to Trump are kind of primed to push out this narrative about the election being rigged as the results are coming in. Very difficult for us to understand what that might mean in practice. And I think we're just not prepared. And one thing I really want to stress in this talk is that too many of us who work in the quality information space still think about this in a broadcast way, not just TV or radio, but can we get enough people to follow our Facebook page? Can we get enough people to follow our Twitter account? Can we get enough people to visit our fact-checking site? What Trump understands is that the audience is networked and information flows between small peer-to-peer groups, people that trust, and they take information and they twist it to fit a narrative that fits with their community. And that is what we need to work on, is how do we take the ways that we've seen information move over the last 20 to 50 years and bring it up to date in the way that the audience is networked. And I would argue those of us in the quality information space have not taken that seriously. So let's move on a little bit to thinking about what you might do in different situations, because this stuff is hard. I'm not saying anything other than that. So I want you to choose your own character. You might lead a trust and safety team at Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. You might be a journalist working for a local Florida TV station. You might be a community organizer focused on get out the vote in South Florida. That's a typo. Or you might just be an American citizen who cares about disinformation influencing friends and family, and you live in Miami. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to choose your character. It's for the Brits in the room. That's a very loved TV program. But I will say this very quickly. I did give 2 thoughts about whether or not I should do this. I've put fake labels over the kind of created tweets and posts that I've made. Please, please, please don't screenshot this and tweet it out. I'm going to be in serious trouble. We might inadvertently start a disinformation campaign. So please don't do it. But at the same time, we've got to have these conversations, which is why I decided to do it. But I'm trusting you that none of this ends up with a big egg omelette on my face. So scenario 1, October 26th. And this tweet is doing the rounds. Look what I just found on my local Nextdoor group. It was shared by someone who lives next to a state official. It's an open box full of ballots. We are so screwed. So in this image here, you do a reverse image search and you find out that that's actually a genuine image, but somebody has photoshopped the word governor onto the box. So in this context, there's quite a lot of engagement around it. But what would you do depending on who you are as a character? Now, if I'm Twitter, this actually breaks my voter suppression policies, so I'm probably going to take this down. If I'm a news reporter, I might argue that I don't really want to give this oxygen unless this is part of what looks like a coordinated campaign. However, I might use it as an example, among others, to show the audience how they can do reverse image searches and to say, be on the lookout. You are probably going to see pictures of ballots in the wrong places, and that's to be expected because this is a deliberate tactic by people who are trying to undermine the vote. So I might do a bit of a pre-bunk here, and I might actually use it in that context, but I'm probably not going to do a full-out debunk and do a whole piece on this because I don't actually just want to give this more oxygen. If I work for a Get Out the Vote campaign, I'm probably going to activate my WhatsApp groups and my email listserv, and I'm just going to say, be wary, this is circulating in Florida. Again, talk to your communities about the damage that disinformation can do. And if I'm just somebody interested in all of these things and I see it, I hope that I would talk to my friends and family when they post it on Facebook and Instagram to say, can I just let you know this isn't true and this is how you can work that out? But I'd love to talk to you about why we're also worried about the election. So I would use empathy with my friends and family. I wouldn't just say, you're wrong, look at this article from CNN. But as you can see, lots of different ways that people can think about this. Scenario 2, October 28th. Here is something that is circulating via SMS. This might not be true, but I wanted to warn you as I love you. I'm seeing so many people talking about these rumors going around that there are going to be people at polling locations harassing voters and even spitting on people as a way to dissuade them from voting. With COVID on the rise again, I don't think it's worth the risk. So what would different organizations do? So if I work for WhatsApp or Apple iMessage or Facebook Messenger, I'm probably not going to see this. Most of these are encrypted. I'm not going to know that's circulating. I'm going to struggle to know how widespread this is. So as we know, this is why closed messaging apps are so concerning. If I'm a news reporter and I get sent this by a member of the public because they've seen it, I'm going to struggle to decide whether or not I should report on this because I don't know how widely spread this is. And if I report on it, you might have a number of people who are like, I hadn't even considered the fact that I might be harassed if I go to the polls. So if I'm a news reporter, this is really tricky. If I work for a local community group, I might again send out an alert to my network saying, there are rumors circulating via SMS. Be very wary about anybody talking about harassment. This is a dedicated tactic because this is why this is such a damaging version of disinformation because you can't debunk a rumor of what might happen in the future. I can go to the local police department and say, what would you do in this situation? But I can't say that this is definitely not going to happen. And that's why this is so concerning. So if I'm a member of the public, this is a kind of situation where you'd want to talk to your friends and family about why this tactic is so influential. But to say, there's a reason why we believe in voting. This is a designed attempt to try and suppress the vote, et cetera, et cetera. But have we given those tools to the public to have those conversations with each other? I don't think we have. Scenario 3, October 30th. As you can see, this is Florida man. He has a lot of followers, and he's basically saying, voting machines are malfunctioning at least 5 polling places. It's now election day in Miami-Dade County. If you want your vote to be counted, you need to arrive at your polling place with an absentee ballot already filled out. Voters standing in line are being sent home. So all of a sudden, it's election day, and this rumor is starting to circulate with somebody who has a large following. This is a real concern at this point. If you're a platform, I would hope that you would take this down. If you're a news reporter at this stage, this might be an argument for saying you've got to go big or go home. This needs to be debunked. You need to be giving real information about what's happening at the voting locations, that this is not true. If you're a community organizer, you are on the phones nonstop. And if you are a person who cares, again, the hope is that you would be talking to friends and family about that this is not true. And here's a reminder of, how you vote and how you vote safely. And people talking about standing in line, again, saying this is a deliberate tactic to try and suppress the vote. Scenario 4, still November 3rd, election day. Election desks are being very careful about calling anything because of the number of mail-in ballots. In a few states, counting of those ballots has only just started. But at 11:27 p.m., a White House insider account tweets this and gets huge engagement immediately. The fake news media won't tell you this, but our internal sources show that Trump has won. We didn't need the fraudulent mail-in ballots. Just the people who showed up today were enough to secure victory. The president is about to confirm. Stay tuned, America. #Keep America Great. Now, as you can imagine, I've got a version of that tweet that is actually Trump saying that. I wasn't going to put that on this screen, but this is what everybody is very worried about. And one of the things that makes me most mad is it's only very recently that the platforms have developed policies about what they would do if a candidate calls an election, and YouTube still hasn't done it. But this is the thing that we should be most concerned about. News organizations, we're working with a number of them. Many of them don't yet have scenarios for this situation. How would they word the tweet? They can't ignore a tweet like this if it was to come from the president, but how would they word that tweet to not give oxygen to it? How do they explain to people that a candidate can't call an election? Everything in the US, just to make it clear, the media projects the result on election night. It doesn't get confirmed until the 14th of December when the Electoral College meets, but that's not what most Americans think. They think the results gets called on election night. Again, if you're members of the public at this stage, these are the people that I really feel for, people sitting at home expecting a result. And if there is a vacuum at this point and the result, this kind of thing happens, I'm worried that ultimately those people who are not tuned in to credible sources of information are going to turn to one another. And very quickly, it's going to be about who are you turning to? And that will depend on what you believe and what you think is the truth. And finally, scenario 5, November 5th. By November 5th, the result has not been confirmed. Rumors are flying around on social media that the ballot counting process is not safe. Militiamen have started turning up at polling locations in Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Counter protesters are starting to arrive and tensions are rising. Social posts are hyping the tension. So you can imagine something like this very, very easily at this point. And if we have this period of time when the results aren't confirmed, when you've got America more divided than ever, on a knife edge because of the pandemic, people turning to information sources that confirm their worldview, we could be in a very bad situation very, very quickly. And I don't think that any of us are prepared, platforms, news media, civil society, and the public, to know what to do in this situation. And I don't want to be hyperbolic. I'd rather that everything gets solved on November 3rd and we can all go to bed and everything's okay. But if we don't consider what it might look like, we're in trouble. So again, I don't have easy answers here, but all I can hope is that over the next 2 weeks, everybody is scenario planning for this particular situation. So how could we have been better prepared? I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it is unforgivable that we are where we are now, this close to an election. From the platform's perspective, we should have finalized and coordinated election-related platform policies a long time ago. Look, this is from October 7th, Facebook talking about its political ads policy. This should have been done before the midterms. There is no excuse that we don't have clear guidelines on this kind of content. This is something that Justin Hendricks put together last week, where he's talking about the different tech platform policies on claims of election victory. I can't put into words how I feel that we're in this situation and we don't have clear guidelines on these issues. We should have had independent testing of platform interventions. On one hand, we have seen more in the last 5 months than we've seen in the last 10 years. I'm not here to say that it's wrong that the platforms haven't started thinking about things like labels, flagging. All of that is good, except, again, should have been done 3 years ago, and we should have had independent researchers sitting with the platforms to think about unintended consequences of these flags and labels. Some of you might have heard Emily Saltz from PAI, who is doing extraordinary work on this right now. I think, again, those of us who believe in quality information, we have this gut instinct about labels are great, we should have more of that, we need more context. But we are in a very dangerous situation if we're not crying out for more transparency about what's been taken down, by what criteria, who's making the decisions, when's the appeals process. That's just on takedown bits. And when we talk about flags and labels, we need much more robust and independent testing on these things. And we should have been doing it 3 weeks before an election. That's very important. And to be fair to Twitter, what happened this week with the New York Post and the Hunter Biden emails, I've actually got a lot of sympathy for Twitter because it's 3 weeks out from an election. I'd rather that they moved quickly and then rolled back and said we made a mistake than sat on their hands and we had an active disinformation campaign on our hands. So I'm glad that they did something. I wish we didn't have the news media screaming at them now, because we all need to be thinking about this. And these are really, really difficult, complex questions. I don't think we could all sit in a room for 100 hours and not come up with something that we all agree on. This stuff is hard. So I don't want to be critical, but God, I really wish we had been doing this earlier. For the news media, you might have seen this week, Jay Rosen and another, I think 40 political scientists came out with recommendations for media covering the 2020 US presidential election. Yay! But where was that? We needed it 3 years ago, and we needed newsrooms to sign up to it. And we needed training for all newsrooms so that we understood what was happening here. We don't have guidelines and principles for covering disinformation, which is why we got the mess that we did this week with the New York Post and the Hunter Biden emails. For the public, we should have been having scaled, innovative digital literacy interventions. At every convening I've been at, there's like, yeah, literacy, yeah, that's great. However, that's going to take a very long time. So in the meantime, can Facebook just tweak their algorithm? Why have we not been throwing money at this, trying, testing, trying again, innovating? I just really worry. There's some great work being done, but it's not at a scalable level. And I still don't think it's as innovative as it needs to be. And let's just have this conversation about community groups. Do you remember when I was talking about a networked audience? Community groups absolutely understand that. When we were working in the Brazilian election in 2018, of course, Bolsonaro had created whole networks of WhatsApp groups. And I remember talking to a number of journalists in Brazil and said, oh, well, do you have a network of WhatsApp groups? Like, how can we push out, content to those communities? And the journalists looked at me and said, oh, well, we wouldn't do that because that's activism. And they were right. That's not the job of newsrooms. But how on earth do we do this if we, in the equality information space, keep thinking about broadcasting when actually the audience is networked? And when I found this image for this slide, this is actually from the NYC census group. They really understood that in order to get this stuff out, there needs to be on Kakao Talk, WeChat. We have to think about ways in which we can be in those networked environments, not just assuming people are going to come to us. And finally, what do we need to do now? We need to stop thinking about atoms of content. The way that we do research, we find a Facebook post, we tag it, we flag it, we put it in a database. The platforms are making decisions about individual atoms of content. Should this stay up? Should it be taken down? Should it be flagged? But the way this works at scale is that it's not about atoms of content. It's about how they get pieced together to create narratives that then control the speech and they control the way that arguments are being discussed. We are woefully unprepared to do that kind of research and to understand how these narratives are being constructed. And that's what's so concerning to me, because if we look at the first presidential debate, which I think is going to be the only one, when you look at this, Biden was creating sound bites and he hoped those sound bites would be amplified by the news media. President Trump wasn't looking for sound bites. He was creating memeable moments that he knew his supporters would take, shape, and redistribute to the communities that they care about in ways that that content makes sense to their communities. He understands a networked audience in a way that those of us who are coming from the quality information space just don't. And if we don't wrap our heads around what that means, we really are in trouble. The whole ecosystem has changed. When I look at the work that I did in 2017 about definitions and everything else, I now cringe. It looks like a walk on a Sunday in Disneyland when I think about what's actually happening now. And we need to up our game if we're going to really respond to the problems that we're facing. And you might remember this, but about an hour before the debate, Joe Biden tweeted this. It's debate night, so I've got my earpiece and performance enhancers ready. And I remember internally in our team, somebody said, well, Biden's got a new communications director. And we kind of like, well, this is great. This is a meme. This is like a way of thinking about things that are different. And then the great Mike Caulfield, that many of you know, tweeted this. I tried to tell you all 2016 would look tame by comparison, and now we're all watching the QAnon crowd spin out a child trafficking conspiracy theory because Biden tweeted a picture of ice cream literally 10 minutes after it's up. And that is what we're dealing with. And last night I saw this on Jay Rosen's post. He actually showed that CNN pulled away from Trump because there was lie after lie after lie. We can't keep operating as if this is business as usual. We are facing something that looks very, very different. But I'm just going to end this because as time is up, is that I often talk about people swimming in polluted information streams. And sometimes I think about us all wearing, how can we give people resilience like they're wearing wetsuits so they can swim in those polluted information environments? I think this woman is sexy as hell and she needs to be our new savior. But I just want to end here. The stakes are serious and current events are terrifying. Ooh. And while none of this is easy and the results won't be quick, there's a reason we all keep working on this challenge, even though most of us are absolutely exhausted. The alarm goes off every day and we still do what we do. And I do believe that we can get through this, but it's going to take time. But the fact that we all keep turning up every day gives me hope. And so that's where I want to leave everybody. And my team will kill me if I don't have these links up. But if you are interested in any of the work that you've heard me talk about here, we have a private Twitter account, we have weekly pre-bunking emails, we have a Slack community, and we have daily and weekly newsletters. And we talk about all of the kind of stuff that I just talked about to help newsrooms and others work with all of this. So thank you for your time. I wish we were all there together, but maybe one day soon that will happen.